At 28 years old, Maya Chen had just handed over the keys to a fully paid off house to the very neighbors who had watched her mother call her worthless for years. But this story doesn't begin with success. It begins in a cramped apartment in Denver, Colorado, where a teenage girl was about to discover that sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who tear you down the hardest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in the Chen household. Maya jolted awake to the sound of her mother Linda's voice cutting through the thin walls of their two-bedroom apartment. "Maya, get up! Mrs. Patterson is coming over in an hour and this place is a disaster." Maya rubbed her eyes and glanced at the clock. 6:30 in the morning. She had been up until 2 finishing her calculus homework and a college application essay that was due that day. At 17, Maya was carrying a full course load of advanced placement classes while working 20 hours a week at the local grocery store to help with family expenses. But none of that seemed to matter to her mother. Linda Chen had been a different person before Maya's father died in a construction accident when Maya was 12. Back then, their small family had felt complete, despite their modest means. David Chen had been a gentleman who encouraged Maya's love of mathematics and praised her curiosity about how things worked. He would spend evenings helping her with homework, his calloused hands patiently guiding her through complex problems. "You have a gift, little mathematician," he would say, watching her solve equations that stumped her classmates. "Don't let anyone tell you differently." After his death, everything unraveled. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and Linda was forced to take 2 jobs to keep them afloat. She worked as a cashier at a discount store during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. The stress transformed her from Maya's biggest supporter into her harshest critic. The change had been gradual but devastating. Maya remembered the exact moment she realized she had lost her mother's faith. It was 6 months after the funeral when Maya brought home a report card showing all A's except for a B+ in chemistry. Instead of celebration, Linda had stared at the paper with hollow eyes. "Your father always said you were smart," she had said quietly, "but smart doesn't pay the bills, Maya. Smart doesn't keep the lights on." From that day forward, nothing Maya did seemed good enough. Her academic achievements were dismissed as just school stuff that doesn't matter in the real world. Her part-time job was criticized for not bringing in enough money. Her college aspirations were labeled as unrealistic dreams that will only lead to disappointment. The apartment they shared reflected their financial struggles. The carpet was worn thin in places, the kitchen faucet dripped constantly, and the heater only worked sporadically during Colorado's harsh winters. Maya had learned to study wearing multiple layers and gloves when the temperature dropped too low. Linda's bitterness seemed to grow with each passing month. She began making cutting remarks about Maya's character, particularly when neighbors were within earshot. Mrs. Patterson, who lived in the apartment next door, became an unwitting audience to Linda's increasingly cruel assessments of her daughter. "Maya's just going through a phase," Linda would say when Mrs. Patterson asked about college plans. "She thinks she's too good for real work, always has her nose in a book instead of helping around here." Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 60s whose husband had recently retired from teaching, would often express concern about Maya's well-being. "That girl works so hard," she would tell Linda. "I see her coming home from work late, then her light is on until all hours. She seems very dedicated." But Linda had developed a narrative that cast Maya as the source of their problems. "Dedicated to avoiding responsibility," she would respond. "I've given her everything, and she just takes and takes. Lazy kids these days think the world owes them something." The irony was not lost on Maya. While her mother complained about her laziness to anyone who would listen, Maya was actually supporting nearly a quarter of their household income through her grocery store job. She had also been accepted to 3 state universities with partial scholarships, achievements that Linda had dismissed as participation trophies. Maya's relationship with her mother deteriorated further when she began tutoring other students to earn extra money. What should have been seen as initiative was instead viewed as another sign of Maya's selfishness. "Now she's too good to help her own family," Linda told Mrs. Patterson during one of their hallway conversations that Maya couldn't help but overhear, "making money off other people's kids while her mother works herself to death." The tutoring had actually been Maya's attempt to contribute more to household expenses while building relevant experience for her college applications. She charged modest rates and often helped struggling classmates for free, but explaining this to her mother had become impossible. Linda seemed determined to find fault with everything Maya did. The tension reached a breaking point during Maya's senior year of high school. College application deadlines were approaching, and Maya had been staying up late working on essays and scholarship applications. Her grades remained excellent, but the stress was taking its toll. She had lost weight and developed dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. One evening in November, Maya was working on a particularly challenging scholarship essay when she heard Linda talking to Mrs. Patterson in the hallway. The walls were thin enough that conversations carried easily between apartments. "I just don't know what to do with her anymore," Linda was saying, her voice loud enough to ensure Maya could hear every word. "She sits in that room all day and night, pretending to study, but I think she's just being lazy, avoiding real responsibility." Mrs. Patterson's voice was softer, harder to make out, but Maya caught fragments of her response, something about college being important and Maya seeming very focused on her goals. "College is a waste of money we don't have," Linda replied sharply. "She needs to face reality and get a real job, help support this family instead of chasing fantasies." Maya's hands had trembled as she tried to continue writing. The scholarship essay asked applicants to describe their biggest challenge and how they had overcome it. She had been writing about her father's death and the financial hardships that followed, but now she realized the real challenge was sitting just beyond her bedroom door. The breaking point came 2 weeks later during parent-teacher conferences. Maya had been hoping her mother would attend to hear the positive feedback from her teachers, particularly her calculus instructor who had recommended her for advanced mathematics programs at several universities. Instead, Linda skipped the conferences entirely, claiming she had to work late. When Maya's counselor called the apartment to reschedule, Linda took the opportunity to share her perspective on her daughter's academic performance. Maya could hear the conversation from her room, where she was supposedly doing homework but actually listening in growing horror. "Maya's teachers keep talking about college," Linda said into the phone, "but between you and me, I think they're just being nice. She's not as motivated as they think. At home, she barely lifts a finger to help, always making excuses about homework when there's real work to be done." The counselor must have pushed back because Linda's voice became more defensive. "Look, I know my own daughter. She's got her head in the clouds with these unrealistic dreams. Someone needs to prepare her for the real world. Not everyone gets to go to college and avoid responsibility." That conversation crushed something inside Maya that had been holding on to hope. Her own mother was actively undermining her academic achievements to school officials. The woman who should have been her biggest advocate was instead portraying her as delusional and lazy. The final straw came during Thanksgiving break. Maya had been accepted to Colorado State University with a partial academic scholarship that would cover 60% of her tuition. She had also secured additional grants that brought her total aid to nearly 80% of costs. It was an incredible achievement that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. When the acceptance letter arrived, Maya had waited for the right moment to share the news with her mother. She found Linda in the kitchen, sitting at their small table with a cup of coffee and a stack of bills. "Mom," Maya began carefully, "I got some good news today." Linda looked up with the weary expression that had become her default. "What now?" "I got accepted to CSU, with scholarships. They're offering to cover most of the tuition." Maya had expected some reaction, surprise, pride, maybe even a smile. Instead, Linda stared at the acceptance letter with something approaching disgust. "How much is most?" she asked flatly. 80%. I'd need to cover about $4,000 a year, plus room and board, but I could work during school and— "4,000 we don't have," Linda interrupted, "plus living expenses, plus books, and all the other things they don't tell you about. Maya, we can barely afford this apartment." "I know it's tight, but this is my chance. I could get a degree, get a better job, help us both." "Help us both," Linda's voice rose sharply. "You want to help us? Get a full-time job. Move out so I can get a smaller place I can actually afford. Stop living in fantasy land and face reality." The words hit Maya like physical blows. She had worked tirelessly for years, maintaining excellent grades while contributing to household income, all while enduring her mother's constant criticism. Now, when she had achieved something remarkable, Linda was treating it like another burden. "Mom, this scholarship is a big deal," my counselor said. "Your counselor doesn't live in the real world either," Linda snapped. "None of you do. You think college is some magic solution that's going to fix everything, but all it is more debt and more excuses to avoid growing up." Maya felt tears threatening but fought them back. "Dad wanted me to go to college. He always said education was important." The mention of David seemed to trigger something in Linda. Her face flushed with anger, and she stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Don't you dare bring your father into this," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Your father isn't here to see what you've become, a selfish girl who thinks the world owes her something. He isn't here to see how you've made my life harder every single day." The accusation was so unfair, so completely opposite to reality, that Maya felt something break inside her chest. She had sacrificed sleep, social activities, and her own comfort to help support their family. She had endured years of criticism and emotional abuse while maintaining academic excellence, and now her mother was blaming her for making life harder. "That's not fair," Maya said quietly. "I've done everything I could to help. I work 20 hours a week on top of school. I help with rent. I cook dinner half the time. I clean." "You do the bare minimum," Linda cut her off, "and then you expect praise for it. Well, congratulations, Maya. You figured out how to be a barely adequate human being. That doesn't mean you deserve to have college handed to you." The conversation that followed would haunt Maya for years. Linda proceeded to list every way Maya had supposedly disappointed her, every instance where she had fallen short of expectations that seemed to change daily. The academic achievements that had made Maya proud were reframed as evidence of her impracticality. Her work ethic was dismissed as showing off. Her college dreams were characterized as selfish abandonment of family responsibility. "Mrs. Patterson asked me yesterday if I was proud of you," Linda said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Proud of what? A daughter who thinks she's too good for the life that's been provided for her? A girl who would rather hide in her room with books than face the real world?" Maya realized in that moment that her mother's resentment ran deeper than financial stress or grief over David's death. Linda seemed to genuinely believe that Maya's intelligence and ambition were character flaws rather than strengths. She had constructed a reality where Maya's successes were actually failures, and her contributions to the family were somehow selfish. The conversation ended with Linda delivering an ultimatum that would force Maya to make an impossible choice. "Here's how this is going to work," Linda said, pointing at the college acceptance letter. "You can pursue this college fantasy if you want, but you'll do it without my help and without using this apartment as your safety net. If you're adult enough to make this decision against my advice, then you're adult enough to live with the consequences." Maya stared at her mother, processing the meaning behind the words. "You're kicking me out if I go to college?" "I'm giving you a choice," Linda replied coldly. "Act like an adult and support yourself, or stay here and get a real job like everyone else in this family has had to do." The choice was devastating in its unfairness. Maya could give up her educational dreams and resign herself to the same struggles that had consumed her mother, or she could pursue her goals at the cost of her relationship with her only remaining family member. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment building. Mrs. Patterson's television murmured through the walls. The upstairs neighbor's footsteps creaked across the floor. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. These sounds had been the soundtrack to her adolescence, but now they felt like the closing notes of a song that was ending. She thought about her father and what he would have wanted for her. David had always encouraged her to dream big and work hard to achieve those dreams. He had believed in her potential even when she couldn't see it herself. Now she faced a choice between honoring his memory and maintaining her relationship with her mother. The decision, when it came, felt both impossible and inevitable. Maya could not sacrifice her future to appease a mother who seemed determined to drag her down. She could not abandon the goals that her father had nurtured and that she had worked so hard to achieve. And she could not continue living in an environment where her best efforts were met with contempt and criticism. 3 days after the ultimatum, Maya made her choice. She accepted the scholarship to Colorado State University and began making plans to leave home. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but it also felt like the only way to save herself from drowning in her mother's bitterness. Linda's reaction to Maya's decision was swift and brutal. She began referring to Maya as ungrateful and selfish in conversations with neighbors, painting herself as the victim of a daughter who had abandoned her family responsibilities. The narrative she constructed bore no resemblance to reality, but it allowed Linda to maintain her sense of righteousness while pushing away the one person who had been trying to help her. The night before Maya was scheduled to leave for college, she overheard her mother talking to Mrs. Patterson in the hallway one final time. The conversation would stay with her for years, serving as both a painful memory and a source of motivation. "She's making the biggest mistake of her life," Linda was saying, "but some people have to learn the hard way. Maya's always thought she was smarter than everyone else. Well, now she'll find out what the real world is like without Mommy to take care of her." Mrs. Patterson's response was quiet but firm. "Linda, that girl has been taking care of herself for years. And taking care of you, too, from what I've seen. Maybe you should be proud of what she's accomplished, instead of angry about it." "You don't know what you're talking about," Linda replied sharply. "Maya's lazy and entitled. She's running away from responsibility, just like her father always said she would when things got tough." The lie about her father was the cruelest cut of all. David had never said any such thing. In fact, he had spent his last years building up Maya's confidence and encouraging her ambitions. Linda was rewriting history to erase the memory of a man who had believed in his daughter's potential. Maya packed her belongings that night with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of anger and determination. Her mother had given her a choice between accepting abuse and pursuing her dreams. The choice was clear, even if it meant leaving behind the only home she had ever known. The next morning, Maya loaded her few possessions into a borrowed car and drove away from the apartment complex where she had spent her teenage years. She did not say goodbye to her mother, who had made it clear that Maya's departure was viewed as betrayal rather than achievement. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Maya caught a glimpse of Mrs. Patterson watching from her window. The older woman raised her hand in a small wave, a gesture of support that meant more than she could have known. In that moment, Maya promised herself that someday she would return to repay the kindness that Mrs. Patterson had shown her. She had no way of knowing that this promise would eventually lead to one of the most satisfying moments of her adult life. But that story was still years in the making, built on a foundation of determination that had been forged in the apartment she was leaving behind. Maya drove toward her future with nothing but a partial scholarship, a used car that might not make it through the semester, and an unshakable belief that she could build something better than the life her mother had resigned herself to accepting. The girl who had been called lazy and entitled was about to discover just how much she was capable of achieving when she was finally free to prove herself on her own terms. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges that would test every ounce of strength and resilience she possessed. But Maya Chen was ready for the fight. She had been preparing for it her entire life, even when she didn't realize it. And someday, she would return to that apartment complex not as the failure her mother predicted, but as living proof that dreams, backed by determination, could overcome even the cruelest doubts. Part 2. The Journey. Colorado State University sprawled across Fort Collins like a small city, with red brick buildings and tree-lined pathways that seemed worlds away from the cramped apartment Maya had home. Her dorm room in the oldest residence hall was barely larger than a closet, shared with a roommate named Jessica, who came from a family wealthy enough to treat college as an extended summer camp rather than a life-changing opportunity. Maya's first semester was a brutal education in the realities of being truly on her own. The partial scholarship covered tuition, but everything else fell squarely on her shoulders. Textbooks alone cost more than she had budgeted for, forcing her to hunt for used copies, borrow from the library, or simply go without when no other options existed. Her meal plan was the most basic available, providing 2 meals a day with no flexibility for late nights in the library or early morning study sessions. While Jessica decorated their shared space with expensive bedding and electronics sent from home, Maya's side remained sparse. A single photograph of her father sat on her desk alongside a calculator that had been his last gift to her. She had brought only the essentials, and even those felt like luxuries she could barely afford. The academic workload was intense but manageable for someone with Maya's preparation and discipline. Her mathematics courses felt like coming home to a familiar language, and she quickly established herself as one of the stronger students in her program. But success in the classroom didn't translate to financial security, and Maya found herself constantly calculating and recalculating her budget, trying to stretch dollars that seemed to disappear as quickly as she earned them. Her work-study job in the university library paid minimum wage for 15 hours per week, barely enough to cover basic necessities. Maya learned to survive on ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food she could find at campus events. She discovered that certain dining halls threw away perfectly good food at closing time, and she wasn't too proud to discreetly rescue items that would otherwise go to waste. The social aspects of college life remained largely foreign to Maya. While other students went to parties, joined clubs, or spent weekends exploring Fort Collins, Maya worked additional shifts at a local coffee shop she had found during her second week on campus. The owner, a former teacher named Robert Martinez, had taken pity on the serious young woman who applied for every available opening and hired her despite her limited experience. Maya's schedule became a carefully orchestrated dance between classes, library work, coffee shop shifts, and study time. She typically woke at 5 in the morning to review notes before her first class, worked until late evening, then studied until well past midnight. The routine was exhausting but necessary, and it left little time for the friendships and experiences that defined college for most students. Her roommate Jessica initially tried to include Maya in social activities, but the invitations gradually stopped when it became clear that Maya couldn't afford the dinners, movies, and shopping trips that comprised Jessica's idea of fun. The gap between their experiences created an uncomfortable tension that both girls learned to navigate by essentially ignoring each other's existence. Maya's isolation was compounded by the complete absence of family support. While other students received care packages, phone calls, and visits from home, Maya heard nothing from her mother. She had left Linda's contact information with the university in case of emergencies, but months passed without any communication. The silence was both painful and liberating, confirming that she had made the right choice while highlighting just how alone she truly was. Her academic performance remained excellent throughout her first year, earning her recognition from professors who began to see her potential for advanced study. Dr. Sarah Chen, her calculus professor, and no relation despite the shared surname, became an unexpected mentor who noticed Maya's dedication and natural ability. "You have an intuitive understanding of mathematical concepts that can't be taught," Dr. Chen told Maya after class one day. "Have you considered graduate school, research? There are opportunities available for students with your talent." The suggestion seemed impossibly ambitious to Maya, who was barely managing to afford undergraduate study. But Dr. Chen persisted, introducing Maya to other faculty members and encouraging her to consider research opportunities that might provide financial support while advancing her education. During her sophomore year, Maya applied for and received a research assistantship working with Dr. Chen on a project analyzing traffic flow patterns using advanced mathematical modeling. The position provided a modest stipend and, more importantly, gave Maya her first taste of applied mathematics in the real world. She discovered a passion for using mathematical principles to solve practical problems, a skill that would prove invaluable in her future career. The research work also introduced Maya to computer programming and data analysis, skills that were becoming increasingly valuable in the job market. She spent her free time learning additional programming languages and familiarizing herself with statistical software, building expertise that set her apart from other mathematics students who focused solely on theoretical concepts. Her financial situation improved slightly with the research assistantship, but Maya continued working at the coffee shop to cover living expenses. The combination of academic work, research responsibilities, and part-time employment left her perpetually exhausted, but she had learned to function on minimal sleep and maximum determination. During her junior year, Maya's research with Dr. Chen attracted attention from the local transportation planning firm that was struggling with complex traffic optimization problems. The company, Northway Analytics, reached out to the university seeking graduate students who might be interested in consulting work. Dr. Chen immediately recommended Maya, despite her undergraduate status. Maya's first meeting with Northway Analytics was intimidating. She sat in a conference room, surrounded by experienced engineers and city planners, presenting mathematical models that she had developed as part of her research. Her hands shook as she explained her methodology, but her analysis was solid and her recommendations were practical. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," said the company's owner, Thomas Brennan. "Maya, would you be interested in working with us on a contract basis? We could use your expertise on several upcoming projects." The consulting work provided Maya with her first real income, paying rates that far exceeded her other jobs. More importantly, it gave her practical experience applying her mathematical skills to real-world problems and working with professional clients. She learned to translate complex mathematical concepts into language that non-mathematicians could understand, a skill that would prove crucial in her future success. Maya's reputation within the company grew quickly as she successfully completed project after project. Her mathematical models helped optimize traffic light timing, reduce congestion at problem intersections, and improve the efficiency of public transportation routes. The work was challenging and rewarding, providing the kind of intellectual stimulation that had been missing from her other jobs. During her senior year, Thomas Brennan made Maya an offer that would change her trajectory completely. Northway Analytics had been awarded a major contract with the Colorado Department of Transportation, a multi-year project that would require significant mathematical modeling and data analysis. "We want you to join us full-time after graduation," Thomas told Maya during a meeting in his office. "We'll provide training in transportation engineering principles, support your professional development, and offer a starting salary that I think you'll find attractive." The salary he quoted was more money than Maya had ever imagined earning, certainly more than her mother made, working 2 jobs. But more than the financial opportunity, the position represented validation of her abilities and proof that her educational investment had been worthwhile. Maya accepted the offer immediately, securing her first professional position before she had even graduated. The news felt surreal after years of struggling to afford basic necessities. She was going to be a professional mathematician, using her skills to solve important problems while earning enough money to support herself comfortably. Her graduation ceremony was a bittersweet affair. Maya walked across the stage to receive her diploma with no family members in attendance, but Dr. Chen and several colleagues from Northway Analytics had come to celebrate her achievement. The absence of her mother was painful, but Maya had learned to create her own support network from the people who recognized and valued her contributions. After graduation, Maya threw herself into her new role at Northway Analytics with the same intensity she had brought to her studies. The work was complex and demanding, requiring her to learn engineering principles while applying her mathematical expertise to increasingly sophisticated problems. She quickly established herself as an indispensable member of the team, developing innovative solutions that impressed both colleagues and clients. The financial stability of her new position allowed Maya to make changes that felt revolutionary after years of scraping by. She rented a small apartment in Fort Collins, her first solo living space since leaving her mother's home. The apartment was modest but clean and quiet, with a dedicated space for her growing collection of mathematical and engineering texts. Maya's success at Northway Analytics opened doors to additional opportunities. She began presenting her work at professional conferences, publishing papers in transportation journals, and building a reputation within the industry as an innovative thinker who could solve problems that stymied more experienced practitioners. Her expertise in mathematical modeling caught the attention of other companies facing similar challenges. Maya began taking on additional consulting projects, working evenings and weekends to help businesses optimize their operations using advanced analytics. The extra income allowed her to build savings for the first time in her life, creating a financial cushion that provided security and peace of mind. 3 years after graduation, Maya made the decision to leave Northway Analytics and establish her own consulting firm. The choice was risky, giving up the security of a steady paycheck to bet on her ability to build a successful business. Chen Analytics started out as a one-person operation working out of her apartment, but it grew rapidly as word spread about Maya's innovative approaches to difficult problems. Her first major client was a logistics company struggling to optimize delivery routes across multiple states. Maya's mathematical models reduced their transportation costs by 15% while improving delivery times, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The success of that project led to others, each more complex and lucrative than the last. Maya found herself working with manufacturing companies, optimizing production schedules, retail chains, improving inventory management, and technology firms, streamlining data processing operations. Her reputation for delivering results spread throughout the business community, and demand for her services grew faster than she could accommodate. Maya hired her first employee after 18 months in business, a recent graduate named Kevin Walsh, who had the technical skills to help implement the solutions Maya designed. The addition of Kevin allowed Maya to take on larger projects and serve more clients, increasing both her revenue and her impact on the businesses she served. The growth of her consulting firm required Maya to develop new skills beyond mathematics and analytics. She learned about business management, client relations, and financial planning. She studied marketing and sales, discovering how to communicate the value of her services to potential clients who might not understand the technical details but could appreciate the bottom line results. Maya's business acumen proved as sharp as her mathematical abilities. She priced her services appropriately, invested in the best technology and software, and built a team of skilled professionals who shared her commitment to excellence. Chen Analytics became known throughout the region as the go-to firm for companies facing complex optimization challenges. The financial success of her business far exceeded Maya's initial expectations. Within 5 years of starting the company, she was earning more annually than she had once thought possible. But the money was secondary to the satisfaction of building something meaningful from her own efforts and abilities. Maya's success provided her with opportunities to give back to the community that had supported her education and early career. She established a scholarship fund at Colorado State University for first-generation college students facing financial hardship, providing the kind of support she had wished for during her own struggles. She also began mentoring young women interested in mathematics and engineering, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to pursue their ambitions despite obstacles. The work with students reminded Maya of her own journey and the people who had helped her along the way. She thought often of Dr. Chen, whose mentorship had been crucial in opening doors to research and professional opportunities. She remembered Robert Martinez at the coffee shop, who had given her flexible work arrangements that allowed her to focus on her studies. And she thought of Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had tried to defend her when her own mother was determined to tear her down. Maya had maintained minimal contact with her former life in Denver, but occasionally she would search online for information about her old neighborhood and the people she had known. She learned that Mrs. Patterson's husband had died several years after Maya left for college, leaving the elderly woman alone in the apartment next to where Maya had once lived with her mother. The discovery troubled Maya, who remembered Mrs. Patterson's kindness during the time when few people had shown her any compassion. She began to consider ways she might be able to help the woman who had once tried to stand up for her, though she wasn't sure how to approach someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Maya's thoughts about Mrs. Patterson intensified when she learned through online research that the elderly woman was struggling financially. Property records showed that Mrs. Patterson still owed money on the mortgage for her apartment, despite having lived there for over 20 years. The monthly payments were apparently becoming difficult to manage on her fixed retirement income. The discovery sparked an idea that seemed both generous and fitting. Maya had built a successful business using the mathematical skills that her mother had dismissed as impractical. She had achieved financial independence while helping other companies solve complex problems. Now she had the opportunity to solve a problem for someone who had tried to defend her when she was vulnerable and alone. Maya began researching Mrs. Patterson's financial situation more thoroughly, using public records and professional contacts to understand the details of her mortgage and financial obligations. What she discovered was heartbreaking but solvable. Mrs. Patterson owed approximately $48,000 on her mortgage, with monthly payments that consumed nearly half of her Social Security income. The stress of making those payments was clearly taking a toll on the elderly woman's ability. For Maya, $48,000 represented less than 2 months of revenue for her consulting firm. It was a significant sum, but well within her ability to provide without impacting her own financial security. More importantly, it was an opportunity to honor the memory of someone who had shown her kindness during the darkest period of her adolescence.
Maya spent weeks planning how to approach the situation. She wanted to help Mrs. Patterson without creating embarrassment or discomfort for the elderly woman. She also wanted to ensure that her assistance would be accepted and would actually improve Mrs. Patterson's life rather than creating new complications. The solution Maya developed was characteristically thoughtful and well planned. She would arrange to pay off Mrs. Patterson's mortgage through an anonymous donation, structuring the payment to appear as if it came from a charitable foundation rather than from Maya directly. This approach would allow Mrs. Patterson to accept the help without feeling obligated to someone she might not even remember clearly. Maya worked with a lawyer to establish the necessary legal framework for the donation, ensuring that all paperwork would be handled professionally and that Mrs. Patterson would receive clear documentation showing that her mortgage had been satisfied. The process took several months to arrange properly, but Maya was determined to handle every detail correctly. The plan required Maya to visit Denver for the first time since leaving for college nearly a decade earlier. She dreaded the possibility of encountering her mother, but she was committed to seeing the project through personally. Mrs. Patterson deserved to know that someone cared about her welfare and appreciated the kindness she had shown years earlier. Maya's return to her childhood neighborhood was an emotional experience that brought back memories both painful and bittersweet. The apartment complex looked smaller and shabbier than she remembered, with obvious signs of deferred maintenance and aging infrastructure. The parking lot was cracked and weedy, and several units appeared to be vacant. She parked her car and sat for several minutes, gathering courage for what she planned to do. In a few hours, she would walk up to Mrs. Patterson's door and reveal herself as the troubled teenager who had one flat next door. She would explain how Mrs. Patterson's kindness had meant more than the elderly woman could have known, and she would hand over documentation showing that the mortgage on her apartment had been paid in full. The moment represented more than just a financial gift. It was Maya's opportunity to demonstrate that the girl her mother had called lazy and worthless had become someone capable of changing lives for the better. It was proof that the dreams Linda had dismissed as unrealistic had become the foundation for meaningful success. Maya checked her reflection in the car mirror and straightened her shoulders. She had traveled a long way from the frightened teenager who had left this place with nothing but determination and a partial scholarship. Now she was returning as a successful businesswoman with the power to solve problems and help others in need. The girl who had been labeled as lazy was about to prove just how much she had accomplished through years of relentless work and unwavering focus. And Mrs. Patterson, who had once tried to defend that girl against unfair criticism, was about to discover that her kindness had not been forgotten or wasted. Maya stepped out of her car and walked toward the apartment building, where her transformation had begun. She carried with her an envelope containing documents that would change Mrs. Patterson's life, but also validation of her own journey from rejection to success. The next few hours would complete a circle that had been nearly a decade in the making, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to exceed every expectation placed upon you. Maya checked her reflection in the car mirror and straightened her shoulders. She had traveled a long way from the frightened teenager who had left this place with nothing but determination and a partial scholarship. Now she was returning as a successful businesswoman with the power to solve problems and help others in need. The girl who had been labeled as lazy was about to prove just how much she had accomplished through years of relentless work and unwavering focus. And Mrs. Patterson, who had once tried to defend that girl against unfair criticism, was about to discover that her kindness had not been forgotten or wasted. Maya stepped out of her car and walked toward the apartment building where her transformation had begun. She carried with her an envelope containing documents that would change Mrs. Patterson's life, but also validation of her own journey from rejection to success. The next few hours would complete a circle that had been nearly a decade in the making, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to exceed every expectation placed upon you.
Maya stood outside Mrs. Patterson's door, her hand raised to knock, when the sound of footsteps on the stairs behind her made her turn. An elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun was slowly climbing the steps, carrying a small bag of groceries and moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints protested every movement. It was Mrs. Patterson, though she looked frailer than Maya remembered. The years had carved deeper lines around her eyes and bent her shoulders forward, but her face still held the same gentle expression that had once offered Maya comfort during her mother's tirades. Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched the woman who had tried to defend her when no one else would. Mrs. Patterson noticed Maya standing by her door and paused, squinting slightly as she tried to place the well-dressed young woman waiting in the hallway. "Can I help you, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice carrying the same warmth Maya remembered, though it was now softer with age. "Mrs. Patterson," Maya said, her voice catching slightly. "I'm Maya Chen. I used to live next door with my mother, Linda, about 10 years ago." Recognition dawned slowly in Mrs. Patterson's eyes, followed by surprise and then genuine delight. "Maya! Oh my goodness, look at you! You're all grown up!" She set down her groceries and studied Maya's face with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile memory with reality. "I can't believe it. You look so successful, so confident." Maya smiled, remembering how Mrs. Patterson had always been direct but kind. "Thank you. It's wonderful to see you again. I was hoping we could talk, if you have a few minutes." Of course, of course. Come in, please." Mrs. Patterson fumbled with her keys, her excitement making her movements less steady than usual. "I want to hear everything. What brings you back to this old place?" The apartment was exactly as Maya remembered it, though everything seemed smaller and more worn than her teenage recollections. The same floral wallpaper covered the walls, and the same crocheted doilies adorned the furniture. Family photographs covered every available surface, showing grandchildren who had grown up in the years since Maya had lived next door. Mrs. Patterson bustled around, offering tea and cookies despite Maya's protests that she didn't want to be any trouble. The elderly woman's genuine excitement at seeing Maya again brought tears to her eyes. This was what family should feel like, she thought. This was how someone should react when a person they cared about returned home, successful and accomplished. "Now tell me everything," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. "I always wondered what happened to you after you left for college. Your mother never liked to talk about it much." Maya chose her words carefully, not wanting to speak ill of her mother, but also wanting to be honest about her journey. She described her years at Colorado State University, her struggles to afford school, her research work, and the development of her consulting business. Mrs. Patterson listened with rapt attention, occasionally exclaiming with pride at Maya's achievements. "I always knew you were special," Mrs. Patterson said when Maya finished her abbreviated life story. "Even when you were young, I could see how hard you worked, how determined you were. I used to tell your mother that she should be proud of you, that you were going to do great things someday." "You did more for me than you know," Maya said quietly. "There were times when I felt like nobody believed in me, when I wondered if maybe my mother was right about me being lazy or unrealistic. But I remembered that you saw something different. You defended me when I couldn't defend myself." Mrs. Patterson waved her hand dismissively, though Maya could see she was pleased. "You didn't need defending, dear. You just needed someone to recognize what was already there. Your mother was going through a difficult time after your father died. She didn't always see things clearly." Maya nodded, appreciating Mrs. Patterson's diplomatic way of acknowledging Linda's failings without being harsh about them. It was typical of the woman's generous nature that she would find excuses for behavior that had been inexcusable. "Mrs. Patterson," Maya said, reaching into her briefcase and pulling out a manila envelope. "I came here today because I wanted to thank you for your kindness all those years ago, and I wanted to do something that I hope will make your life a little easier." She handed the envelope to Mrs. Patterson, who looked at it with curiosity and slight apprehension. "What's this, dear?" "Open it," Maya said gently. Mrs. Patterson's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. Maya watched her face as she read, seeing confusion give way to disbelief and then to shock. "I don't understand, Mrs."
Patterson whispered, staring at the mortgage satisfaction papers. "This says my loan has been paid in full, but that's impossible. I still owe nearly $50,000. "It's not impossible," Maya said softly. "It's just been taken care of. Your mortgage is paid off, Mrs. Patterson. You own your home free and clear." Mrs. Patterson looked up at Maya with wide eyes, the papers shaking in her hands. "But who? How? Maya, did you do this?" Maya nodded, feeling a surge of emotion at the elderly woman's reaction. "I've been very fortunate in my business. I wanted to use some of that good fortune to help someone who helped me when I needed it most. Tears began streaming down Mrs. Patterson's face as the reality of the gift sank in. Oh, my dear child, this is too much. I can't accept something so generous. It's too much money. It's not too much, Maya said firmly. Mrs. Patterson, do you remember what you told my mother when she complained about me going to college? You said I was dedicated and hardworking, that I deserved support instead of criticism. You were the only person who stood up for me during that time. She leaned forward, taking the elderly woman's hands in hers. That meant everything to me. It kept me going when I wanted to give up. And now, because of the path I was able to take, I can afford to do this. It's not charity, Mrs. Patterson. It's gratitude. Mrs. Patterson continued crying, but Maya could see they were tears of joy mixed with overwhelming relief. Maya, you have no idea what this means. I've been so worried about making the payments. They take up so much of my Social Security, and with prices going up on everything, I was starting to think I might have to sell and move somewhere smaller. Now you don't have to worry about that, Maya said. You can stay here as long as you want. The apartment is yours. They sat together for a while, Mrs. Patterson alternately crying and expressing her gratitude, while Maya assured her that she was honored to be able to help. The elderly woman insisted on showing Maya recent pictures of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing family news as if Maya were a beloved relative who had returned home after a long absence. As their visit stretched into the afternoon, Maya began to worry that she might encounter her mother. She wasn't sure she was emotionally prepared for that confrontation, especially not on the same day she had given Mrs. Patterson such meaningful news. But as if summoned by her thoughts, the sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway announced Linda's approach. Maya heard her mother's voice before she saw her, talking on a cell phone in the same complaining tone she remembered from childhood. I don't care what the doctor says about my back. I still have to work. Bills don't pay themselves, and some of us don't have rich family members to bail us out. The footsteps stopped outside Mrs. Patterson's door, followed by a sharp knock that made both women jump slightly. Helen, are you in there? I saw an expensive car in the parking lot and wanted to make sure you were okay, Linda called through the door. Mrs. Patterson looked at Maya with concern, understanding that this unexpected encounter might be difficult. Do you want me to tell her you're not here? Maya took a deep breath and shook her head. No, it's okay. I think it's time. Mrs. Patterson opened the door to reveal Linda Chen, who looked much older than her 53 years. Her hair was streaked with gray and pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes showed the wear of someone who couldn't afford to replace them regularly. The years had not been kind to her, leaving lines of bitterness etched deeply around her mouth and eyes. Linda's days moved from Mrs. Patterson to Maya, and her expression shifted from concern to confusion to recognition, and finally to something that might have been shame or anger or both. Maya, she said flatly, as if the name left a bad taste in her mouth. What are you doing here? Hello, Mother, Maya replied, rising from her chair. The physical contrast between them was striking. Maya stood tall and confident in her well-tailored business suit, her posture radiating success and self-assurance. Linda seemed to shrink in comparison, her shoulders hunched and her stance defensive. I was visiting Mrs. Patterson, Maya continued, catching up on old times. Linda's eyes narrowed as she took in Maya's expensive clothing and professional appearance. Catching up, huh? And what brings you back to our humble neighborhood? Finally ready to admit that the real world isn't as easy as you thought it would be? Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her protective instincts clearly activated by Linda's hostile tone. Linda, Maya has done wonderfully for herself. She owns her own business and has been very successful. Is that what she told you? Linda laughed bitterly. Maya always was good at making things sound better than they actually were. Big dreams, remember? College was going to solve all her problems. Maya felt the familiar surge of anger that her mother's words always provoked, but she also felt something new, pity. Looking at Linda now, Maya could see that her mother had aged poorly, worn down by years of resentment and financial struggle.
The bitterness that had once seemed so powerful now appeared pathetic and self-destructive. "College did solve my problems, Mother," Maya said calmly. "I graduated with honors, built a successful consulting business, and have been able to help people solve complex problems using the mathematical skills you always said were worthless." "Is that what she told you?" Linda laughed bitterly. Maya always was good at making things sound better than they actually were. Big dreams, remember? College was going to solve all her problems. Maya felt the familiar surge of anger that her mother's words always provoked, but she also felt something new: pity. Looking at Linda now, Maya could see that her mother had aged poorly, worn down by years of resentment and financial struggle. The bitterness that had once seemed so powerful now appeared pathetic and self-destructive. "College did solve my problems, Mother," Maya said calmly. "I graduated with honors, built a successful consulting business, and have been able to help people solve complex problems using the mathematical skills you always said were worthless." Linda's expression grew more defensive. "Well, aren't you special? And I suppose you think that makes you better than the rest of us who have to work real jobs in the real world?" "I think it makes me someone who didn't give up on herself," Maya replied. "Someone who chose to believe in her potential instead of accepting limitations that other people tried to impose." The words hit their mark, and Linda's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare lecture me about limitations. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've sacrificed. You ran away when things got difficult instead of staying to help your family." "I left because staying would have destroyed me," Maya said, her voice remaining steady despite the emotion behind it. "You made it clear that my dreams were unwelcome in your house, that my achievements were somehow selfish. I chose to pursue a future where I could succeed instead of staying in a place where I was constantly told I would fail." Mrs. Patterson watched this exchange with obvious discomfort, but she also seemed fascinated by the transformation in Maya. The confident young woman standing in her living room bore little resemblance to the frightened teenager who had once lived next door. "Success," Linda repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call abandoning your mother? Running away when she needed you most?" "You didn't need me," Maya said with conviction. "You needed someone to blame for your unhappiness, someone to control and criticize so you could feel better about your own choices. I couldn't be that person anymore." Linda opened her mouth to respond, but Maya continued before she could speak. "But you know what, Mother? I'm grateful for everything that happened. Your constant criticism taught me that I couldn't depend on other people's approval to determine my worth. Your lack of support forced me to become self-reliant and resourceful. Your prediction that I would fail motivated me to prove you wrong." Maya gestured around Mrs. Patterson's apartment, where the mortgage documents still lay on the coffee table. "Today, I was able to pay off Mrs. Patterson's mortgage as a thank you for the kindness she showed me when I was young. That's what success looks like. Not expensive cars or designer clothes, but the ability to help people who helped you when you needed it most." Linda's eyes fell on the documents, and Maya watched comprehension dawn on her face. "You paid off her mortgage?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "How much was that?" "Enough to matter to Mrs. Patterson, not enough to impact my business," Maya replied. "I'm fortunate that my consulting firm has done well enough that I can afford to be generous with people who deserve it." For the first time since Maya had known her, Linda seemed genuinely speechless. She stared at the mortgage papers as if they were written in a foreign language, trying to process the reality that her daughter had casually paid off a debt that represented more money than Linda made in 2 years. "I don't understand," Linda finally said. "What kind of consulting do you do that pays so much money?" "Mathematical optimization for businesses," Maya explained. "I help companies solve complex problems related to logistics, scheduling, inventory management, resource allocation, the kind of abstract mathematical thinking you always said was useless in the real world." Linda's face cycled through several emotions as she processed this information.
Maya could see her struggling to reconcile her long-held beliefs about her daughter with the evidence of Maya's success standing before her. "But you were always so impractical," Linda said weakly. "Always had your head in the clouds with numbers and theories." "Those numbers and theories have allowed me to build a business that employs 12 people and serves clients across the western United States," Maya said. "Dad was right when he said I had a gift for mathematics. I just had to find the right way to apply it." The mention of David seemed to deflate Linda even further. Maya could see her mother remembering all the times she had dismissed Maya's abilities as impractical dreaming, all the occasions when she had criticized her daughter for pursuing the very path that had led to this success. Mrs. Patterson, sensing that Linda needed time to process what she was learning, offered to make more tea. Linda accepted gratefully, sinking into a chair as if the weight of her realizations had become too much to bear standing. "Maya," Linda said quietly after Mrs. Patterson had gone to the kitchen, "I may have been wrong about some things." It was the closest thing to an apology Maya had ever heard from her mother, and she felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at hearing it. Too little, too late, perhaps, but it was something. "You were wrong about many things," Maya said gently, "but you were also dealing with grief and financial stress that I didn't fully understand at the time. I don't excuse the way you treated me, but I can see now that you were struggling too."
Linda looked up at her daughter with eyes that held pain and something that might have been regret. "I was so angry after your father died. Angry at him for leaving us, angry at the world for being so unfair, angry at myself for not being strong enough to handle everything alone. And you reminded me so much of him. Your intelligence, your determination, your refusal to give up on your dreams, even when everything seemed impossible." Maya felt her chest tighten at this unexpected vulnerability from her mother. She had never heard Linda speak about her father with anything other than bitterness or dismissal. "You reminded me of what I had lost," Linda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every time you succeeded at something, every time a teacher praised you or you brought home good grades, it felt like proof that he was really gone, that the life we had planned together was over, and I was left with this brilliant daughter who was going to leave me too." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. She had spent years believing that her mother's criticism stemmed from genuine disapproval of her character and abilities. The possibility that Linda's hostility had actually been rooted in fear of abandonment and grief over losing David reframed everything Maya thought she understood about their relationship. "I thought if I could convince you that college was a mistake, that your dreams were unrealistic, maybe you would stay," Linda said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Maybe you wouldn't leave me alone like he did. I know that sounds selfish and horrible, but I was desperate. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, too." Maya felt her own tears threatening as she processed her mother's words. The cruel irony was obvious. Linda's attempts to keep Maya close had driven her away completely, ensuring the very abandonment she had been trying to prevent. "Mom," Maya said softly, sitting down across from her mother, "pushing me down didn't make me want to stay. It made me feel like I had to leave to survive." "I know that now," Linda replied. "I've known it for years, actually. But by the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late. You were gone, and I was too proud to admit I was wrong, too ashamed to reach out and apologize." Mrs. Patterson returned with fresh tea, moving quietly as if she sensed the gravity of the conversation taking place in her living room. She set the tray on the coffee table and took her own seat, her presence somehow making the space feel safer for both women to continue their difficult dialogue. "What happened after I left?" Maya asked. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you've had some difficult years." Linda laughed bitterly, but it was directed at herself rather than at Maya. "Everything fell apart, just like you probably expected it would. Without your income from the grocery store job, I couldn't afford the apartment we were living in. I had to move to a smaller place, then an even smaller one when my hours got cut at the discount store." She gestured to her worn clothing and tired appearance. "I've been working whatever jobs I could find, but nothing stable, nothing that pays well. My back problem started about 5 years ago, which makes physical work difficult. I qualify for some assistance programs, but it's barely enough to get by. Maya listened without judgment, though she couldn't help thinking about how different her mother's life might have been if she had supported Maya's education instead of fighting against it. A daughter with a successful business could have provided financial assistance and emotional support. Instead, Linda had chosen pride and stubbornness over practicality. I kept telling people that you would come back eventually, that you would realize I was right about college being a waste of money and come home to help support the family like you should have been doing all along. But as the years passed and I never heard from you, I started to understand that maybe I had been wrong about everything. Mrs. Patterson spoke up for the first time since returning with the tea. Linda, I tried to tell you for years that Maya was special, that she was going to do well for herself. You should have been proud of her accomplishments instead of trying to diminish them. I know that now, Linda said, looking at Mrs. Patterson with gratitude. You were the only person who ever defended her when I was being unreasonable. I should have listened to you. Maya felt a surge of affection for Mrs. Patterson, whose consistent support had meant more than the elderly woman could have known. It struck her that Mrs. Patterson had shown more faith in Maya's potential than her own mother had, which made the mortgage payoff feel even more appropriate. Mrs. Patterson, Maya said, I want you to know that your kindness all those years ago literally changed my life. There were moments in college when I wanted to give up, when the financial pressure and the loneliness felt overwhelming. But I remembered that someone believed in me, someone thought I was worth defending. That memory kept me going. Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the realization that her small acts of kindness had had such a profound impact. Oh dear, I was just saying what any reasonable person could see. You were clearly a special young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Not everyone could see that, Maya said, glancing at her mother, but you did, and it mattered more than you know. Linda was staring at the floor, apparently lost in her own thoughts about the choices she had made. When she looked up, her expression had changed, showing a vulnerability that Maya had never seen before. Maya, Linda said hesitantly, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to tell me about your life? About what you've accomplished? I know I don't deserve to be proud of you after everything I did to hold you back, but I think I'd like to try. The request was so unexpected that Maya wasn't sure how to respond. After years of no contact and decades of criticism, her mother was asking to be included in her life again. The offer felt both generous and dangerous, opening the possibility of renewed relationship, but also the risk of falling back into old patterns. I can tell you about my business, Maya said carefully, but I need you to understand that things would have to be different between us. I won't accept criticism of my choices or my lifestyle. I won't tolerate being told that my success is somehow invalid or that I should be doing something else with my life. Linda nodded eagerly.
I understand. I have no right to criticize anything about your life, especially when you've obviously made such good decisions. I'd like to know who my daughter became after she left home. Maya spent the next hour describing her journey from struggling college student to successful business owner. She told her mother about the research assistantship that had opened doors to consulting opportunities, about starting her own firm and building it into a regional powerhouse, about the clients she had helped and the problems she had solved. Linda listened with an expression of growing amazement and what appeared to be genuine pride. She asked thoughtful questions about Maya's work and seemed genuinely interested in understanding how mathematical concepts could be applied to business problems. I remember your father trying to explain some of this to me, Linda said at one point. He always said that mathematics was like a universal language that could unlock solutions to almost any problem. I never really understood what he meant until now. The mention of David in a positive context was encouraging, suggesting that Linda might be ready to honor his memory by supporting the dreams he had nurtured in Maya rather than continuing to dismiss them. Dad would have been proud, Maya said simply. He always believed that I could do anything I set my mind to. I wish he could have seen what came of all those evenings we spent working on math problems together. He would have been so proud, Linda agreed, her voice thick with emotion. and he would have been ashamed of me for trying to discourage you from following the path he started you on." The acknowledgement felt like a breakthrough, the first time Linda had openly admitted that her opposition to Maya's education had been wrong. It didn't erase years of conflict and pain, but it suggested the possibility of a different kind of relationship going forward. Mrs. Patterson had been listening to this exchange with obvious satisfaction, clearly pleased to see some resolution between the mother and daughter whose conflict had played out in her hallway years earlier. "Maya," Mrs. Patterson said, "would you be willing to stay for dinner? I don't have much, but I'd love to cook for you both. It would mean so much to have you here for a proper meal." Maya looked at her watch and realized that the afternoon had slipped away during their intense conversation. She had planned to drive back to Fort Collins that evening, but the idea of sharing a meal with Mrs. Patterson was appealing. It would also give her more time to process this unexpected reconciliation with her mother. "I'd love to stay for dinner," Maya said, "but please let me take you both out to a restaurant. I know a nice place not far from here, and it would be my pleasure to treat you both to a proper celebration." Mrs. Patterson protested that it wasn't necessary, but Maya insisted. After the emotional intensity of the afternoon, she wanted to do something purely joyful, something that would create positive memories to balance against the painful history of this place. They drove to a family-owned Italian restaurant that Maya remembered from her teenage years, though she had never been able to afford to eat there when she lived in the neighborhood. The owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe, still remembered Maya from her grocery store job and was delighted to see how well she had done for herself. "I always knew you were going places," Giuseppe said, beaming as he seated them at his best table. "You had that look in your eyes, you know, the look of someone who was not going to be stopped by anything." Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair, with conversation flowing more easily than Maya had expected. Mrs. Patterson regaled them with stories about her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, while Linda asked thoughtful questions about Maya's business and seemed genuinely interested in learning about her daughter's life. The evening felt like a glimpse of what their relationship might have been if Linda had chosen support over sabotage all those years ago. Maya found herself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of building something positive with her mother, though she remained realistic about the challenges ahead. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Linda asked if Maya would be willing to stay in touch, perhaps through occasional phone calls or messages. "I know I have a lot to make up for," she said, "but if you're willing to give me a chance, I'd like to try to be the mother you deserve to have." Maya agreed to limited contact, starting with brief phone calls every few weeks. She wanted to see if Linda could maintain the respectful tone she had adopted during their reunion, and she was curious about whether her mother's apparent transformation was genuine or temporary. The drive back to Mrs. Patterson's apartment gave Maya time to reflect on everything that had happened during her visit. She had accomplished her primary goal of thanking Mrs. Patterson for her kindness and ensuring her financial security, but she had also experienced an unexpected reconciliation with her mother that opened possibilities she hadn't imagined when she decided to return to Denver. When they arrived back at the apartment complex, Maya walked Mrs. Patterson to her door and gave her a warm hug goodbye. "Thank you for everything," Maya said, "for defending me when I was young, for welcoming me back today, and for giving me and my mother a chance to work through from difficult issues." "Thank you, dear child," Mrs. Patterson replied, tears in her eyes, "for the incredible gift you've given me, but also for becoming the amazing woman I always knew you could be. Your father would be so proud of you." Linda stood nearby, watching this exchange with an expression of profound regret. When Mrs. Patterson had gone inside, she turned to Maya with tears in her own eyes. "I'm sorry," Linda said simply, "for everything. For not being the mother you needed, for trying to hold you back instead of encouraging you, for wasting so many years being bitter instead of being proud. I'm sorry it took me this long to see how wrong I was." Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions at hearing the apology she had wanted for so many years. Part of her felt vindicated and relieved. Part of her felt sad for all the lost time and unnecessary pain. And part of her felt hopeful about the possibility of building a better relationship going forward. "I accept your apology, Mom," Maya said quietly. "I can't promise that things will go back to the way they were before Dad died, because too much has happened for that. But I'm willing to see if we can build something new."
They exchanged phone numbers, and Linda promised to call within the week. As Maya drove away from the apartment complex for the second time in her life, her feelings were very different than they had been during her first departure. Instead of anger and determination fueled by rejection, she felt a sense of completion and peace. The young woman who had left this place with nothing but a scholarship and a dream had returned as a successful professional capable of changing lives for the better. She had proven wrong every negative prediction her mother had made about her, and she had done so while maintaining her integrity and her compassion for others. But perhaps more importantly, she had found a way to transform her painful past into purposeful action.
The criticism that had once wounded her had motivated her to excel. The financial struggles she had endured had taught her to value security and use her resources wisely. The loneliness she had experienced had made her appreciate the kindness of people like Mrs. Patterson and motivated her to help others when she had the opportunity. Maya's drive back to Fort Collins gave her time to think about the broader implications of her visit to Denver. The mortgage payoff for Mrs. Patterson had been personally satisfying, but it had also demonstrated the kind of impact she could have when she used her financial success strategically. She began to consider other ways she might be able to help people who had supported her journey or who were facing similar challenges to those she had overcome. The scholarship fund she had established at Colorado State University was already providing assistance to first-generation college students, but Maya realized she could expand that program significantly. Her business was generating more revenue each year, and she was living comfortably without approaching the limits of her income. She could afford to be much more generous with her charitable giving. Maya also thought about the mentoring work she had been doing with young women interested in mathematics and engineering. Those relationships had been personally rewarding, but they were limited in scope and impact. She began to envision a more formal program that could reach larger numbers of students and provide more comprehensive support for their educational and career development. The conversation with her mother had also sparked ideas about helping other families navigate the challenges of financial hardship and educational aspirations. Maya had seen firsthand how economic stress could distort family relationships and lead to destructive decision-making. Perhaps there were ways to intervene in those situations before they reached the breaking point that had characterized her own family experience. By the time Maya reached her home in Fort Collins, she had begun sketching out plans for significantly expanding her philanthropic activities. The success of her business had given her financial resources, but today's visit had reminded her that she also had experiential knowledge and emotional insights that could be valuable to others facing similar challenges. Maya spent the evening researching charitable organizations and educational programs that aligned with her values and interests. She discovered several existing nonprofits that were doing excellent work but lacked adequate funding to expand their impact. She also identified gaps in services that might be addressed through new initiatives or partnerships. The process of researching and planning felt energizing in a way that reminded Maya of the excitement she had felt when first starting her consulting business. She had the same sense of identifying important problems and developing innovative solutions, but now she was motivated by altruism rather than personal necessity. Over the following weeks, Maya began implementing her expanded charitable giving strategy. She increased her funding for the Colorado State University Scholarship Program, allowing it to support twice as many students each year. She established partnerships with 3 organizations that provided educational support for low-income families, contributing both money and expertise to help them improve their effectiveness. Maya also began developing a mentorship program specifically designed to connect successful professionals with first-generation college students who were struggling with the transition to higher education. The program would provide not just academic support, but also guidance on practical issues like financial management, career planning, and navigating professional environments. The work felt like a natural extension of Maya's consulting business, applying her problem-solving skills to social challenges rather than commercial ones. She found herself energized by the opportunity to make a difference in individual lives while also contributing to systemic changes that could benefit larger numbers of people. Maya's relationship with her mother developed slowly but positively over the months following their reunion. Linda called every 2 weeks as promised, and their conversations gradually became more natural and comfortable. Linda never again criticized Maya's choices or suggested that she should be doing something different with her life. Instead, she showed genuine interest in Maya's work and expressed pride in her daughter's accomplishments.
The change in Linda's attitude seemed to extend beyond her relationship with Maya. She began talking about returning to school herself, possibly to earn a degree in social work or education that would allow her to help other families facing the kinds of challenges she had experienced. Maya encouraged this idea and offered to provide financial support for her mother's education if she decided to pursue it. Mrs. Patterson became a regular correspondent as well, sending Maya updates about her life and her family along with expressions of gratitude for the mortgage payoff. The elderly woman seemed to have gained a new lease on life without the stress of monthly payments, and she spoke excitedly about projects she wanted to undertake now that she could afford to maintain and improve her apartment. Maya also heard from Mrs. Patterson about other residents of the apartment complex who were struggling with various challenges. An elderly man on the second floor was facing eviction due to medical bills. A single mother on the third floor was working 2 jobs but still couldn't afford to replace her broken-down car. A disabled veteran in the building next door needed expensive modifications to make his apartment accessible. Each of these stories presented Maya with an opportunity to make a difference in someone's life, and she found herself unable to resist getting involved. She paid the elderly man's medical bills and negotiated with his landlord to prevent the eviction. She purchased a reliable used car for the single mother and arranged for maintenance coverage for the first 2 years. She funded the accessibility modifications for the veteran's apartment and connected him with additional resources for ongoing support. Word of Maya's generosity spread quietly through the apartment complex and the surrounding neighborhood. People began approaching Mrs. Patterson with stories of their own struggles, hoping that she might know someone who could help. Maya found herself inadvertently becoming a one-woman social services agency for a community that had been largely overlooked by traditional assistance programs. The informal helping network that developed around Maya's generosity was both gratifying and overwhelming. She realized that there were far more people in need than she could possibly assist individually, which led her to think more systematically about how to maximize the impact of her charitable giving. Maya decided to establish a formal foundation that could provide more structured and sustainable assistance to low-income families and individuals. The Maya Chen Foundation for Educational Opportunity was incorporated 6 months after her visit to Denver, with a mission to support educational advancement and economic stability for first-generation college students and their families. The foundation's programs included scholarship support, emergency financial assistance, career mentoring, and family counseling services designed to help parents support their children's educational goals rather than discouraging them. Maya drew heavily on her own experiences in designing these programs, trying to address the specific challenges she had faced and the gaps in support that had made her journey more difficult than necessary. Maya's consulting business continued to grow and prosper, providing the revenue stream that funded her charitable activities. She had built a reputation as one of the most innovative mathematical consultants in the region, and demand for her services consistently exceeded her capacity to provide them. The success of her business gave her the luxury of being selective about projects, choosing work that was intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding while leaving time for her philanthropic activities. The integration of her professional and charitable work created a sense of purpose and fulfillment that Maya had never experienced before. She was using her mathematical talents to solve business problems while also using her resources and experiences to solve social problems. The combination felt like the perfect expression of the values her father had instilled in her and the resilience she had developed through adversity. 3 years after her reunion with her mother, Maya received a phone call that brought her story full circle in an unexpected way. Linda was calling to tell her that she had been accepted into a master's program in social work at the University of Colorado, Denver, with plans to specialize in working with families facing economic hardship and educational challenges. "I want to help other families avoid the mistakes I made with you," Linda explained. "I want to use what I learned from our experience to help parents support their children's dreams instead of standing in their way." Maya felt a surge of pride and emotion at her mother's decision. Linda was choosing to transform her regrets into positive action, using her painful experiences to benefit others rather than simply dwelling on them. It felt like the ultimate validation of Maya's belief that personal growth and redemption were always possible. Maya offered to fund her mother's education and provide living expenses during the program, an offer that Linda initially resisted but eventually accepted with gratitude. The financial support would allow Linda to focus entirely on her studies and fieldwork rather than struggling to balance school with the demands of employment. The conversation felt like the completion of a healing process that had begun with Maya's decision to pay off Mrs. Patterson's mortgage. In trying to thank someone who had supported her dreams, Maya had inadvertently created an opportunity for reconciliation with the person who had opposed them. And now her mother is choosing to honor that reconciliation by dedicating her life to supporting other young people's aspirations. Maya's foundation celebrated its third anniversary with a gala fundraising event that brought together scholarship recipients, program participants, community partners, and supporters. The evening showcased the impact of the foundation's work through testimonials from students who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their education and families who had learned to work together toward shared goals. Mrs. Patterson attended the gala as Maya's honored guest, and her presence served as a reminder of how small acts of kindness could have far-reaching consequences. The elderly woman had defended a troubled teenager in a hallway conversation decades earlier, and that moment of compassion had eventually led to a foundation that was changing hundreds of lives. Linda also attended the gala, now in her second year of graduate school and already working with families through her field placement.
She spoke briefly during the program about her journey from being a parent who had opposed her daughter's education to becoming an advocate for educational opportunity. Her remarks were received with appreciation by an audience that included many parents who were struggling to support their children's ambitions despite their own fears and limitations. Maya's remarks at the gala focused on the power of believing in young people's potential even when they couldn't see it themselves. She spoke about the importance of mentorship, financial support, and family understanding in helping students overcome barriers to educational success. But she also emphasized the resilience and determination that young people could develop when they were forced to advocate for themselves and their dreams. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give young people is not making their path easy, but helping them develop the strength to overcome obstacles, Maya said. My own journey taught me that adversity can be a teacher if we choose to learn from it rather than be defeated by it. The gala raised over $200,000 for the foundation's programs, exceeding expectations and demonstrating the community's strong support for Maya's work. The success of the event confirmed that her vision of transforming personal struggles into social benefit was resonating with others who wanted to make a difference in young people's lives. As Maya looked around the ballroom that evening, she was struck by how far she had traveled from the angry, hurt teenager who had left her mother's apartment with nothing but a partial scholarship and a fierce determination to prove herself. She had built not just a successful career and comfortable life, but a network of relationships and a body of work that were making a meaningful difference in the world. The girl who had been called lazy and unrealistic had become a woman whose mathematical skills were helping businesses operate more efficiently, while her philanthropic efforts were helping families build better futures. She had proven that dreams backed by persistent effort could overcome even the most discouraging opposition, and she was using that proof to inspire and support others facing similar challenges. Maya's story had become more than just a personal success narrative. It had evolved into a demonstration of how individual achievement could be leveraged for collective benefit, how personal pain could be transformed into purposeful action, and how broken relationships could sometimes be healed through mutual growth and understanding. The evening ended with Maya standing beside Mrs. Patterson and her mother, three women whose lives had been intertwined by circumstances, but who had chosen to create something positive from their shared experiences. The elderly woman who had shown kindness to a struggling teenager, the mother who had learned to support rather than oppose her daughter's dreams, and the young woman who had transformed criticism into motivation were living proof that people could change, grow, and find ways to lift each other up. As guests departed and the gala came to a close, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge she had faced, every obstacle she had overcome, and every success she had achieved had contributed to her ability to make a difference in other people's lives. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. Maya Chen had started with nothing but determination and had built something that would outlast her own lifetime. The foundation she had created would continue helping students long after she was gone, and the example she had set would inspire others to transform their own struggles into sources of strength for their communities. The girl who had been labeled as lazy had become a woman whose work ethic and generosity were changing lives throughout her region. She had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to exceed every expectation and then use that success to help others do the same. Standing in the ballroom surrounded by the evidence of all she had accomplished, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. She had not only escaped the limitations that others had tried to impose on her, but she had also created pathways for others to do the same. Her story was no longer just about personal triumph, but about the ripple effects of believing in human potential and acting on that belief with generosity and wisdom. The morning after the gala, Maya woke in her comfortable home with plans to visit her office and begin work on expanding the foundation's programs to serve even more students and families. She had requests for assistance from communities across Colorado and neighboring states, evidence that the need for her foundation's work extended far beyond her original geographic focus. Maya's consulting business continued to provide the financial foundation for her charitable work, but she was also exploring ways to make the foundation more self-sustaining through endowment building and diversified funding sources. She wanted to ensure that the programs would continue growing and serving students regardless of fluctuations in her business income. The integration of her professional and philanthropic work had created a life that felt both successful and meaningful, profitable and purposeful. Maya had discovered that true wealth wasn't just about accumulating resources, but about using those resources to create positive change in the world. The mathematical optimization skills that had made her business successful were equally valuable in designing efficient and effective charitable programs. Maya's relationship with her mother had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined during the painful years of conflict. Linda was excelling in her graduate program and had already begun working with families whose dynamics reminded her of her own past mistakes. The experience was helping her develop expertise while also providing ongoing opportunities for reflection and growth. Mrs. Patterson remained a regular correspondent and had become something of a grandmother figure in Maya's life. The elderly woman's apartment had become a gathering place for neighbors who wanted to share news and support each other through various challenges. The mortgage payoff had not only relieved Mrs. Patterson's financial stress, but had also given her the confidence and energy to become a community leader in her building. The ripple effects of Maya's generosity continued to spread throughout the apartment complex and surrounding neighborhood. Families were supporting their children's educational goals instead of discouraging them. Students were finding mentors and resources to help them navigate the challenges of higher education. Parents were learning to communicate more effectively with their children about hopes, dreams, and realistic planning for the future. Maya realized that her story was part of a larger narrative about the power of education, determination, and community support to transform individual lives and strengthen entire communities. She had started as one struggling student trying to escape a limiting environment, but her success had created opportunities for hundreds of other students to pursue their own dreams. The foundation's work was generating interest from researchers studying educational mobility and family dynamics. Maya had been invited to speak at conferences about the relationship between family support and academic achievement, sharing insights derived from both her personal experience and her foundation's program data. Maya's professional reputation had also expanded beyond consulting to include recognition as a thought leader in applying mathematical principles to social challenges. She had published articles about using optimization techniques to improve the effectiveness of charitable programs and had been invited to serve on boards of other nonprofit organizations seeking to maximize their impact. The convergence of Maya's business expertise and charitable work was creating new opportunities to influence policy discussions about educational access and support for first-generation college students. She had been invited to participate in legislative hearings about state funding for higher education and had contributed to research studies about effective interventions for at-risk students. Maya's story was being used as a case study in business schools and social work programs, demonstrating how individual success could be leveraged for broader social benefit. Students were analyzing her foundation's programs and developing recommendations for replication in other communities facing similar challenges. The mathematical models Maya had developed for her consulting business were being adapted to analyze social problems and evaluate the effectiveness of various intervention strategies. Her foundation was becoming a laboratory for testing innovative approaches to supporting educational achievement and family stability.
Maya felt energized by the recognition that her work was contributing to larger conversations about social mobility and educational opportunity. She was no longer just helping individual students and families, but also advancing understanding of how to create systemic changes that could benefit entire populations. The girl who had been called impractical was now being consulted by policymakers and researchers seeking practical solutions to complex social challenges. Her mathematical training was proving invaluable in designing evidence-based programs and measuring their effectiveness in achieving desired outcomes. Maya's journey from struggling student to successful entrepreneur to influential philanthropist demonstrated the potential for individual transformation to create expanding circles of positive impact. She had started by trying to escape limitations imposed by others and had ended up creating opportunities for others to exceed their own limitations. The story that had begun with criticism and rejection had evolved into one of validation and acceptance, but more importantly, it had become a story about using personal success to create pathways for others to achieve their own success. Maya had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to exceed every expectation and then use that success to help others do the same. Standing in the ballroom surrounded by the evidence of all she had accomplished, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. She had not only escaped the limitations that others had tried to impose on her, but she had also created pathways for others to do the same. Her story was no longer just about personal triumph, but about the ripple effects of believing in human potential and acting on that belief with generosity and wisdom. The morning after the gala, Maya woke in her comfortable home with plans to visit her office and begin work on expanding the foundation's programs to serve even more students and families. She had requests for assistance from communities across Colorado and neighboring states, evidence that the need for her foundation's work extended far beyond her original geographic focus. Maya's consulting business continued to provide the financial foundation for her charitable work, but she was also exploring ways to make the foundation more self-sustaining through endowment building and diversified funding sources. She wanted to ensure that the programs would continue growing and serving students regardless of fluctuations in her business income. The integration of her professional and philanthropic work had created a life that felt both successful and meaningful, profitable